Greta does not have a PowerPoint, and so we're set up already. Welcome back. Again, I don't know how I drew this straw. I get to introduce all of my favorite people. This is Greta Christina, as most of you know. Author of Greta Christina's blog, interestingly titled. You have no idea why. But she's also, as of recently, a full-time author and speaker. She's also on our Speakers Bureau and has done fantastic tours all over the country speaking to student groups. She was actually the keynote speaker at our conference a couple of years ago. I had the privilege of having her on one of my panels at Skepticon last year. We'll do so again, assuming she's willing, the next Skepticon. It's always a pleasure to hear from her. Let's give it up for Greta.
Hi. So how are we for sound? We can hear me okay? Okay, awesome. Hi, I'm Greta Christina. Thank you so much, Jesse. Thank you, Secular Student Alliance staff, and thank you to all of you for, being the Secular Student Alliance. Let's see. I'm going to get right to it because I know we're running short on time, and I want to let you hear other awesome speakers. I am talking about coming out. What can the godless learn from the queers? Specifically, I'm talking about how to come out and how we can support each other in coming out. So, again, limited time. I think we're all probably agreed that coming out is one of the most powerful political acts that atheists can take. Limited time, I'm going to assume we're all on board with that and that I don't have to make that case for why coming out is awesome. Is that, okay. Coming out, awesome. And at the same time, I think we all understand that coming out can be difficult. Coming out can have emotional consequences. Coming out can have practical consequences. Coming out can get you, bullied by your schoolmates, etc. And so I think that when we are talking about coming out, we need to do more than just keep telling each other, come out of the closet. We need to do more than just be cheerleaders. I think that we need to circulate specific, effective strategies for coming out. And very importantly, I think we need to circulate strategies for supporting one another in coming out. And that's what I'm talking about today. And in particular, I'm talking about what atheists can learn about coming out from the LGBT movement. I mean, the LGBT movement obviously is very experienced in coming out. We've been doing it for decades, and we're very familiar with why coming out is so important and how it can impact a movement. And we have come up with a lot of really good strategies and support systems for coming out and for helping each other do it. And at the same time, there's also important differences between coming out atheist and coming out queer, and I think we have a lot to learn from those differences as well. So I think the first and most important lesson that we all have to remember, if there's one thing you take away from this talk about coming out, it's this. There is not one right way to do it. There's no magical coming out formula that's going to work for everybody. We need to let each other do it on our own timetable, and we need to let each other do it in our own way. It's also very important to remember, coming out is not a single step that you do once and then you're done with. Coming out is a process. It's an ongoing process. Each time we come out to a different person, that's a different coming out moment. And then, of course, there's some people that we may have to come out to more than once because they don't believe you or they don't accept it the first time around. And even after we've come out to all the central people in our lives, coming out is still a process. Coming out is a series of choices that we make every day. Do we chat about our atheism at the basketball game where other people around us can hear it? Do we wear an atheist t-shirt to the airport? Do we cross "In God We Trust" off the money? And if we do that, do we do it right there in front of the store clerk? Ask me about that. By the way, I have an interesting story about that. When somebody asked us, what church do you go to? Do we say something vague like, oh, I haven't really decided yet? Do we say something a little more specific like, oh, I'm not really very religious? Or do we just come out and flatly say, I don't go to church, I'm an atheist? Being an out atheist is not an either-or thing. Being an out atheist is a continuum. And we all get to decide where to be on that continuum. So coming out is a process, and it's not just a process for us, it's very often a process for the people that we come out to. It can take time for them to get used to it. And so one of the most important things that we need to learn about coming out, and again, this is something we learned from the history of the queer community, is patience. Does everybody here know the sex advice writer, Dan Savage? Okay, so when Dan Savage first told his mother that he was gay, her reaction was not good. And one of the things that she said to him was that she never wanted him to bring any of his boyfriends home, and she didn't want to meet any of them, which is kind of a harsh thing to say, and would be kind of a squelching thing to say. Except that years later, when Dan had been with his partner Terry for some time, Dan's mom was the one who was pressuring them to get married. They were dithering about it, and she was the one who was being a typical mom, saying, come on, I want a wedding already. She came around. It took time. I'm not going to promise that that's going to happen to everybody, but I'm not going to say it will always happen, but it can happen. And if it doesn't happen right away, that doesn't mean it's never going to happen later. So again, patience. We have to be willing to give it time, and sometimes we have to be willing to be the bigger person. When we come out as atheists, people will sometimes be, how shall I put this delicately? Total fucking assholes. And it will not help if we're assholes back. It can escalate the situation. It can push people out on a limb and entrench them into a really hardcore position that they will then have a harder time walking back. So if they get hysterical, we need to stay calm. If they're being manipulative, we need to be straightforward. If they're being cruel, we need to maintain our empathy. We have to be the bigger person. It's a good idea to do homework first, become familiar with the common myths and misconceptions about atheists, and be ready to counter them. But remember, your coming out conversations are not about proving to some jerk on the internet that they're wrong. Your coming out conversations are about letting the people in your life who care about you know that you're going to be okay. They're about reassuring them. So it's okay to stand up for yourself. In fact, I encourage you to stand up for yourself. But remember, the person you're coming out to is somebody who presumably cares about you, and presumably you care about them. Don't treat them as adversaries. And related to that, know when to stop the conversation. If the conversation is going south, you may need to cut it off and come back to it at another time. Again, coming out is can be a long process. Also, very importantly, to the degree that you can, have your practical and financial ducks in a row first. If you're a college student, anybody here a college student? If you're a college student and your parents are supporting you, you might consider waiting to come out to them until after you're out of college and they're not supporting you anymore. If you're coming out at work and coming out might endanger your job, make sure you can handle that financially first. If you're in a very religious community and coming out might isolate you, find an atheist community first and put down roots in it so you won't be isolated. Make sure that your ducks or practical and financial ducks are in a row first. But there's limits to this advice. If you wait to come out until everything is perfectly safe and no bad thing can possibly happen, you are going to wait a very long time. It's important to remember that coming out does mean accepting some risk. But there's a flip side to that, which is that staying in the closet also means risk. For one thing, there's a very specific risk that staying in the closet means, which is the risk that you will be outed by somebody else, either accidentally or intentionally. And being outed is a lot more traumatic than coming out yourself when you can control the timing and control the conversation. And staying in the closet also involves living a lie, and that's a risk. There's stress involved. There's real traumatic stress involved in living a lie for your whole life. So when you're doing that cost-benefit analysis about being out versus being in and where you're going to be on that continuum, remember, neither choice is risk-free. You're taking a risk no matter what. Very importantly, speaking of having your financial ducks in a row, if you're coming out at work, get familiar with non-discrimination laws, both federally and at your local level. And if you do get discriminated against, document it. Actually, it's a really good idea to document your work situation before you come out. If you've been getting good feedback at your workplace, document it, because that way, if you do come out and automatically, mysteriously, you get fired or you get harassed, you have a much better case if you want to make a stink about it. Also, when you come out at your job, it's a really good idea to think strategically about who to come out to first. Think about who in your workplace, first of all, has some degree of authority, and second of all, is somebody who you think might be sympathetic, might be an ally. Now, authority does not have to mean your boss. Authority can mean somebody in human resources. It can mean somebody in the legal department. It can even just mean somebody who people look up to at the office, even if they don't have any official authority. And likely to be supportive doesn't have to mean, I think they're an atheist. Likely to be supportive can be somebody who has a track record of caring about fair play, somebody who has a track record of caring about the law, even just somebody who has a track record of really not wanting the company to get sued and get bad PR. These people can be your allies. Figure out who they are, come out to them first. Identify who they are, come out to them, give them a chance to get used to the idea, get them on your side, and then start coming out to other people. And actually, that is a principle that we can apply in our personal lives as well as our work lives. You don't have to make one big coming out announcement to everybody at once on Facebook. If you think that, you know, your mom's going to handle it better than your dad, or vice versa, you know, come out to the one who you think is going to be on your side first. Queer people have a long history of coming out to mom first. You know, if you think your siblings will handle it better than your parents, if you think your roommate will handle it better than your best friend, come out to them first. This gets you allies who you can get support from if you have a hard time later. And it also just gets you practice. It gets the feeling of coming out familiar. And obviously, if you can, find an atheist community first, in person, online, or both. Even if you don't live in a very religious community, coming out can be stressful and alienating, more so sometimes than we would think. Getting support and advice from other atheists, obviously, hugely helpful. Okay, so all these ideas are drawn from LGBT experience with coming out, decades of experience of coming out as queer. But I think that there's also some real differences in coming out atheist and coming out queer, and I think we have a lot to learn from those differences as well, and I want to get into those briefly too. And here's the big one. When you come out as queer, you're not telling straight people that they're wrong to be straight. When we come out as atheists, there is no way to tell people, I don't believe in God, without implying if you do believe in God, you're wrong. You know, no matter how many pretty pictures of clouds we put behind the words, and I love the pretty pictures of clouds behind the words, but the implication is there. When we come out as atheists, we are telling people that they're wrong. And I think we need to accept that. I think that relations between atheists and believers may always be a little bit strained and may always have some issues that are touchy or that have to be kept off the table in a way that's not necessarily true for relationships between straight people and queer people. And so if you're looking for a way to come out as atheist that's going to make it perfectly okay with the people in your life, again, you have a very long way ahead of you. I think that's not going to happen. The people you come out to will very likely get better about it with time, but unless they become atheists themselves, which does happen, they may always have something of a hard time with it, and I think that that's an important difference between coming out atheist and coming out queer, and we have to remember that. And that actually brings me to another really important point. When we're first coming out, it's important, I think, to focus on countering myths and misconceptions about atheists and about atheism. Do not get sucked into arguments about whether God exists. Now, this may be surprising to some of you because I actually love arguments about whether God exists. I am a big advocate for having them, and I'm a big advocate for having them with the people in our life. The coming out conversation is not the time. And here's why. When you come out to the people you care about, it's not just about them accepting you. It's about you accepting them. And for a lot of people, their religion is a very central part of their identity. It's a very central part of who they are. And when you come to them and say, I don't believe in God, and therefore, by implication, pretty clouds, you're wrong, they often experience it as a personal rejection of them, of something that's a really core part of them. I don't think there's any way around that, but I don't think we need to exacerbate it by getting into the arguments about, you know, and by the way, I'm an atheist, and by the way, here's the 10 reasons why your religion is bullshit. You know, I love those arguments. The coming out conversation is not the time. I actually think there's other important differences between atheism, coming out atheist and coming out queer, but again, limited time. Come talk to me later if you want to talk about those. And so mostly we've been talking today about the difficulties of coming out, and that's understandable. You know, there's difficulties. We want to figure out how to solve them. But I think that there's a flip side when we talk about coming out that we really need to remember, which is sometimes it's really not that bad. Sometimes it's fine. I cannot tell you how many atheists I've talked to who've girded up their loins and they've gotten up the courage to talk to the people and tell them they're an atheist, and their response was, okay, fine, it's really not that big deal. And they said, yeah, I really thought it was going to be this huge issue, and it was really not that bad. And I've also talked to a lot of atheists where the response was kind of in the middle. It was like, yeah, we had some kind of bad conversations, we had a couple of fights, but we got over it, and now it's pretty much okay. It's not necessarily going to be that bad. It may be fine. And sometimes when we come out, the reaction is me too. And I cannot tell you how many atheists have told me their coming out stories and ended them with, I came out to my dad and my dad said, oh my gosh, me too. I'm an atheist too. It's like they have been scared to talk to us. It's like bears. They're more afraid of you than you are of them, And also, sometimes coming out, even if their response isn't, wow, I'm an atheist too and I'm so glad you told me. Sometimes that's what they tell you 6 months later. Sometimes coming out atheist is what starts the people in our lives on their own road to atheism. So that's also an important thing to remember. Okay, I want to shift gears here for a second. We've mostly been talking about how we ourselves can come out. And I want to talk about a different question. I want to talk about how we can support and encourage each other in coming out. I want to talk about how we create a culture where coming out as an atheist is more natural, how we create a culture where coming out as an atheist is seen as a when and not as an if. And I want to talk about how we can make atheism a safer place to come out into. So I think the number one thing we have to remember about supporting each other in coming out is that coming out is easier for some people than it is for others. And that's just the way it is. It can be harder to come out if you're younger, if you're financially dependent on your parents. It can be harder to come out if you live someplace where religion is really deeply ingrained in the culture. It can be harder to come out if you're already part of a marginalized group. If you're gay, if you're a person of color, if you're an immigrant, and you don't need another stigma piled onto the ones you already have. So when we're encouraging each other to come out, which I think we should do, and I think that's awesome, we need to make sure that encouragement doesn't turn into pressure, and doesn't turn into judgment, and doesn't turn into guilt tripping. And I really wish I had this magic formula about how to draw that line. What's the difference between encouragement and pressure? I don't have that magic formula. What I do think is that we need to keep an eye on it. And I think one of the ways to manage that line between encouragement and pressure is to maintain empathy. I think that we can be encouraging and supportive about coming out and still acknowledge that it's difficult. And I think that we can think about the language we use when we're encouraging each other to come out. Instead of just saying, come out, come out, come out, we can say things like, come out if you can. Come out if it's safe. And you remember how we were talking before about how coming out is a continuum? It's not this either-or thing. I think that using that language can also be a way to encourage each other to come out in a way that's empathetic and not guilt-tripping. We can say things like, come out as much as you're able. Take one step out farther than you already are. Come out a little more than you already are. I think that that's a more empathetic way of encouraging each other to come out than just say, come out, come out, come out. Another really obvious way that we can encourage atheists to come out is to do it ourselves. And to be a role model of out, happy atheism. And this is actually one of the best things about coming out as atheists, is that it has this snowball effect. As we come out, that makes it easier for the next wave of people to come out. And then when they come out, that makes it easier for the next wave. And we can be the rock that's dropped in the pond that spreads those ripples out. And that related to that, we should definitely keep working on visibility, the billboards, the bus ads, Facebook, letters to the editor, T-shirts, Twitter, all of that. That really helps. It helps more than you might think. It gets people familiar with us. It gets people, just saying the word, familiar with the basic facts about us, and it helps us find each other, and it helps us create community. Which brings me to forming communities. We're talking a lot about this weekend about forming communities, and I'm going to talk about it too. Absolutely, one of the single most important things we can do to support each other in coming out is to be a community that people can come out into. And polls really consistently show, you've probably all heard these, that the reasons people belong to the religion they belong to, and to the church or temple or synagogue, wherever they belong to, have very little to do with religion, has very little to do with theology. It has to do with community and the social support that people get. And we need to provide that. We need to provide the communities that religion provides, the safety nets in hard times, the counseling, rites of passage, activities for families, and avenues for charitable and social justice work, and things to do that are just fun, a sense of community, a sense of continuity, all that social stuff that religion provides, we need to provide that for people who are leaving. I have a couple of specific notes on community building before I finish up. I've given talks to a lot of different atheist groups around the country. I've given talks to student groups and to local community groups. And the groups that tend to be strongest are the ones with the widest range of activities. If your group only does like socializing and hanging out in the pub, if your group only does service events, service projects, if your group only does like activism and visibility, you're really only going to make yourself a safe place to land for a small portion of the people who might otherwise be interested. When you diversify your activities, you become a safe place to land for a lot more people. Just because different people like to do different things. What do you know? I know, bizarre, right? I would also really love to see us do more to build bridges between student groups and local groups. The student atheist movement, as I think is no surprise to anybody, is awesome. What was the phrase? A juggernaut of secular awesome is what we are. You guys are the juggernaut of secular awesome, but there is this problem, which is that students, when they graduate, often don't stick with atheism. And what I've found in the traveling around the country and doing all these speaking engagements and visiting with groups is that the students who tend to stay in atheism when they graduate tend to be the ones who are already working with local groups, who are already in the habit of it. And the flip side of that is also true. The local groups that are strongest and that have the most diversity of age tend to be ones that are doing work with the student groups. So build those bridges, talk to the SSA about specific tips on how to do that. And speaking of diversity, we were talking about diversity, right? No, we weren't, but I'm going to change the subject and talk about diversity. I actually have a huge amount to say about diversity. I have a whole 45-minute talk. I'm going to try to condense my 45-minute talk on diversity into 1 minute. Diversity, hugely important, and a lack of diversity in a community is a self-perpetuating cycle. We all have unconscious biases and assumptions that keep these self-perpetuating cycles going. That doesn't make us bad people, but we have to acknowledge that. What does make us bad people is if we pretend that's not true. To give just one example, if African Americans are having a harder time coming out as atheists, we can't just give up and say, oh, that's because black people are special. They have these special other black people problems. We can't treat black people as other and white people as the default. We have to say what is making it harder for black people to come out as atheists and what can we do about it as a community. We cannot keep saying this should be a one-size-fits-all movement and that size should be the size that fits the people who are already in the movement. We have to be willing to change the way we do things. We have to do things differently from the ways that we're already comfortable with. Again, I could go on about that for a long time, but I need to wind up here, and you want to listen to other people. So finally for today, again, I could talk about this for a long time, and in fact, I'm writing a book about this. I'm currently working on a guide to coming out atheist. But finally for today, there's one more really hugely important thing that we can do to support each other in coming out, and that's that we can tell happy stories about coming out. We have a tendency when we tell our coming out stories to tell the hard stories, to tell about how traumatic it was, to tell about the difficulties, about the tears and the drama. And that's, again, understandable. Tears and drama make for a better story. But that's really only one side of it. I mean, sometimes coming out can be fun. Sometimes coming out is an adventure. Telling people something about you that they don't know and you don't know how they're going to react and kind of exposing yourself and making yourself vulnerable. And that's scary, but it's exciting. It's fun. And being out is fun. Being out is so much fun. You know, not always, it can sometimes be a huge pain in the ass, but, you know, being out makes you feel liberated. It makes you feel comfortable in your own skin. You know, being out, you know, makes it easier to find other people that you genuinely connect with. You know, living an honest life, a life where you're not constantly keeping track of who knows what secrets about you and what they could do to you if other people find out. You know, just being able to relax and be yourself, that is a really fun way to live. You know, coming out is fun, and being out is fun. And I think that I would really like to see us talk about that more. You know, yes, it can be upsetting. I don't want us to pretend that's not true. It can be dangerous. It can be a pain in the butt. I don't want to pretend that that's not true, but it can also be really awesome. You know, we are happier when we live with more integrity. You know, we're happier when we live with less fear. You know, we're happier when the people who love us really love us. And they don't love this other person who's walking around with our face and our name. You know, coming out can be really hard, but it can also be the door to a better life. And if we want to support each other in coming out, and if we want to create a culture in which coming out is natural, I really would love to see us talk about that more and get that message out.